Der Rest der Lichtstreif, blass und perlmattfarben, schnitt durch die Ritze zwischen den perfekt gezogenen Vorhängen im Schlafzimmer. Serafina Lombardi war bereits wach, hatte die Minuten gezählt, bis der Wecker auf dem Nachttisch seinen metallischen Alarm ausstoßen würde. Sie ließ den Mechanismus nicht zu Wort kommen, sondern schaltete ihn mit einer präzisen Bewegung aus, bevor der erste Ton ertönen konnte. Stille kehrte zurück, eine Stille, die sie selbst geschaffen hatte. Neben ihr atmete wenig schwer und regelmäßig eine Masse unter der Wolldecke, die Wärme unter den vertrauten Geruch von Zigarrenrauch und Pomade ausströmte. Vorsichtig schob sie die Bettdecke beiseite, ihre nackten Füße fanden den kühlen, glatten Boden aus hellem Holz. Das Haus auf der Willow Lane war noch nicht erwacht. Es hielt den Atem an und wartete auf ihre Anleitung. Im Bad wusch sie ihr Gesicht mit kaltem Wasser, blickte in den Spiegel über dem Waschbecken. Mit 32 Jahren sah Sarah, wie nur Vinnie sie nannte, aus, als gehöre sie in eine Zeitschrift. Makellos gewelltes dunkles Haar, das in einer weichen Frisur vom Gesicht weggekämmt war, klare braune Augen, ein Mund, der gelernt hatte, stets eine sanfte, neutrale Kurve zu halten. Sie trug einen seidenen Hausmantel über ihren Nachthemd, die Gürtelschnalle leise klimpernd, als sie die Treppe hinunter in ihr eigentliches Reich glitt, die Küche. Hier herrschte eine andere Art von Stille, eine, die nach Aktivität schrie. Die Morgensen fiel in schrägen Bahnen auf die blassgrünen Formica-Arbeitsplatten, ließ das Chrom des zweitürigen Kühlschranks und der Toaster aufblitzen. Der Geruch von Bodenbox und dem schwachen, süßlichen Unterton vom gestern Abends Bacon lag in der Luft. Sarah bewegte sich mit der sicheren Effizienz einer Tänzerin durch den Raum. Zuerst da Kaffeeecke, eine große, bauschige pekorierte Maschine aus Aluminium. Sie maß die grob gemahlenen Bohnen mit einem geübten Blick ab, füllte kaltes Wasser in den Boden, schaltete ihn ein. Ein befriedigendes, tiefes Gurgeln begann bald zu ertönen, das erste Lebenszeichen des Tages, während der Kaffee sein dunkles Elixier braute, wandte sie sich dem Lunchpaket für Tommy zu. Die Brottos aus emailliertem Metall, rot mit einem weißen Rand, stand bereits bereit. Sie strich 2 Scheiben weißes Brot. Mit einer dünnen Schicht Butter belegte sie mit gekochtem Schinken und einem einzigen Blatt Salat. Kein Zen, menef Dinner Blattsalat. Kein Zen, menef kein Zen, menef Cashit, ein Apfel sorgfältig poliert, 2 hausgemachte Butterkekse, eingewickelt in Wachspapier. Jeder Gegenstand hatte seinen bestimmten Platz in der Dose. Ein Chaos war undenkbar. Sie schloss den Deckel mit einem leisen, endgültigen Klicken. Ein Geräusch von oben, das Knarren einer Fußbodenplanke, dann die schweren Schritte von Vinnies Aufstehen. Sarah nahm 3 Tassen aus dem Schrank, dickwandig, weiß mit einem goldenen Rand, und stellte sie auf die Arbeitsplatte. Genau als der Percolator sein letztes, zufriedenes Blubbern von sich gab, betrat Vinnie die Küche. In Unterhemd und Hosenträger, sein dunkles Haar noch feucht vom Wasser. Er sagte nichts, setzte sich an den Küchentisch und sie schenkte ihm seine Tasse ein, schwarz, wie er es mochte. Sie stellte Tommys Tasse mit viel Milch und einem Löffel Zucker bereit und ihre eigene daneben noch unberührt. Ihre Interaktion war ein einstudiertes Ritual, das keine Wörter benötigte. Kurz darauf polterte Tommy die Treppe hinunter, sein 7-jähriges Energiebündel in kurzen Hosen und gestreiftem Hemd, die Haare an den Seiten abstehend. Schlang sein Müsli hinunter, plapperte über einen geplanten Angriff auf das Baumhaus im Garten des Nachbarn. Sarah nickte, strich ihm mit der Hand über den Kopf, um die widerspenstigen Strähnen zu glätten, und ermahnte ihn leise, artig zu sein. Dann war's Zeit. Vinny stand auf, zog sein Jacket über, gab ihr einen flüchtigen Kuss auf die Wange, einen Kuss, der nach Rasierwasser und Routine roch. Tommy schnappte sich seine Lunchbox an seine schiefe Tafel. Die Haustür öffnete und schloss sich zweimal. Das Drohnen von Vinnys Oldsmobile, die den Zufahrtsweg hinunterrollte, gefolgt von den helleren Tönen des Schulbusses, der an der Ecke hielt und wieder abfuhr. Und dann endlich die Stille. Da war es stille. Sarah stand am Spülbecken, blickte durch das Fenster auf den akkuraten Rasen, die frisch gestrichene Gartenlaube, den Guraten. Rasen, die frisch gestrichene Gartenlaube, den Gehweg, der so sauber war, als wäre er nie betreten worden. Sie trank ihren nun lauwarmen Kaffee, während ihr Geist in Tat vor sich ausrollte, wie einen sauberen, neuen Teppich. Zuerst der Haushalt. Betten machen, Staub wischen, den Esstisch polieren, dann die Besorgungen. Zum Metzger für die Rippchen für das Sonntagsessen, zum Gemischtwarenladen für Mehl und Zucker. Ein kurzer Blick in die Apotheke, ob das neue Lippenstift-Sortiment eingetroffen war. Nachmittags das Treffen des Gartenclubs bei Mrs. Bastrin, des Gartenclubs bei Mrs. Henderson, Endtermin, deleichtet Anspanning, in ihr auslöste, wegen der unvermeidlichen Diskussionen über Rosenzüchtungen und der stillschweigenden Bewertung der Häuser der anderen. Und immer im Hinterkopf die Vorbereitungen für das große Sonntagsessen, wenn Vinnys Familie kommen würde. Die Sauce, die den ganzen Tag köcheln musste, der Tisch, der perfekt gedeckt werden musste, die Illusion von müheloser Fülle. Sie spülte ihre Tasse ab, trocknete sie ab und stellte sie zurück in den Schrank, exakt ausgerichtet mit den anderen. Ihre Hände glitten über die glatte formige Oberfläche, wischten einen unsichtbaren Krümel weg. Das war ihr Domizil, ihr Reich. Jeder glänzende Kopftropf, jedes sauber gefaltete Handtuch, jeder makellose Linoleumboden war ein Beweis für ihre Kontrolle. Hier, in diesem Haus, mit seinem frischen Anstrich und seinen aufgeräumten Blumenbeeten, hatte sie etwas geschaffen, das stabil und schön war. Eine Welt, in der die Milch nie sauer wurde, die Hemden immer gestärkt waren und die Gespräche an der Oberfläche blieben wie das Sonnenlicht auf dem Chrom des Toasters. Sie atmete tief ein, den Geruch vom Kaffee, Wachs und eigene Disziplin in sich aufnehmend. Der Tag lag vor ihr, eine leere, perfekte Seite, die sie mit den richtigen, ordentlichen Zeichemierer Pflichtfüllen würde. Draußen auf der Willow Lane summte ein Rasenmäher in der Ferne. Ein Chor von Zikaden stimmte sein Mittagskonzert an, und das Leben, ruhig und geordnet, ging seinen vorhersehbaren Gang. The Chevrolet Bel Air was a vessel of cool, polished solitude. Sarah settled into the driver's seat. The scent of new leather and the faint, clean aroma of the car wax Vinnie applied every Saturday morning enveloping her. She placed her handbag and the folded shopping list on the passenger seat, then turned the key. The engine purred to life with a confident, throaty rumble that spoke of American power and reliability. She backed smoothly down the driveway, the white wall tires crunching softly on the gravel, and pointed the car's sleek nose toward the commercial heart of the suburb. Main Street unfolded like a diorama of prosperous calm. Sunlight glinted off the plate glass windows of stores bearing names like Thompson's Drugs and the Five and Dime. Neon signs, muted in the daytime, promised cold Coca-Cola and expert dry cleaning. Cars like hers, Buicks and Fords, slid into parallel parking spots with practiced ease. Sarah guided the Bel Air into a space in front of Marino's Market, establishment that managed to feel both impeccably modern and reassuringly old world. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothed a non-existent strand of hair, and stepped out into the mild morning air. The bell above Marino's door announced her entrance with a cheerful jingle. Inside, the air was a complex symphony of smells. The earthy scent of potatoes and root vegetables from wooden bins, the sharp, clean odor of sawdust on the floor, the rich, coppery hint of fresh meat from the rear counter. Overhead, slow-turning ceiling fans stirred the atmosphere. Mr. Marino himself, a stout man with a magnificent white mustache and a blood-streaked apron, looked up from behind the butcher's case. His face broke into a genuine smile. "Mrs. Lombardi, right on time. I set aside just what you asked for." He disappeared into the cold room and emerged with a parcel wrapped in white butcher paper and tied with twine. He placed it on the polished glass with a soft thud. Beautiful pork ribs, the best of the lot, and the sweet sausages, just like your mother-in-law makes, eh? He winked, a gesture that was both friendly and freighted with an understanding that went beyond cuts of meat. Sarah returned a small, appreciative smile. She did not ask the price. She never did. The bill would be tallied at the end, and it would always be fair. This was part of the code. She moved through the aisles with a deliberate pace, her fingers clad in soft leather gloves, selected items with tactile certainty. A can of imported olive oil, its label featuring an Italian landscape she had never seen. A bag of semolina flour finer than the domestic kind. At the produce section, she spent a full minute choosing tomatoes, hefting each one, judging its colour and firmness, seeking the perfect balance of acidity and sweetness for Sunday's gravy. She rejected 3 before finding 6 that met her exacting standards. Each selection was a small, silent act of creation and control. "Sarah, I thought that was your car." The voice was bright, a melody of practiced cheer. Carol Henderson stood at the end of the aisle, her shopping cart a carefully arranged still life of canned peaches and cake flour. Carol was the president of the garden club, a woman whose blonde bouffant never wilted and whose shirtwaist dresses were always impeccably pressed. Her smile was wide and warm, yet her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "Carol, hello." Sarah moved her cart closer, the two women forming a small island of polite commerce in the quiet store. "I'm just in a tizzy trying to decide on fabric for the new living room drapes," Carol sighed, though the sigh seemed more theatrical than weary. "The sample swatches are all so lovely. There's a peacock blue that's simply divine, but Harold thinks it's too bold. He prefers the cream damask." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping a conspiratorial notch. "Men have no vision for these things, do they? But then they're so busy with their own affairs. Harold's got that dreadful meeting in the city next Thursday. He'll be out of town overnight. Such a nuisance." Sarah listened, her expression one of sympathetic interest. She noted the specific day. She heard the unasked question wrapped in the gossip about fabric. "It is a nuisance," she agreed, her voice a soft, neutral murmur. "Vinny mentioned something similar, a meeting about the new warehouse contracts, I believe. He'll be away that night too." She reached past Carol to select a tin of high-quality coffee, her movement casual. "The cream damask is elegant, Carol. It will wear well, and it won't show the dust." Carol's eyes flickered, a signal received and acknowledged. The subterranean business was confirmed. The alibis synchronized, all under the respectable cover of upholstery choices. "You're so right, Sarah. Practicality over flash. That's always the wise choice." She patted Sarah's arm. "I must dash. The Altar Society is expecting a report on the bake sale proceeds. Don't work too hard on that gravy," with another tinkling laugh. Carol wheeled her cart away. Sarah watched her go, then turned back to her list. The interaction left no ripple on the surface of her composure. It was simply another transaction, as routine as buying tomatoes, but conducted in a different currency of information and implication. She completed her shopping, a box of salt, a small jar of cloves, a fresh block of Parmesan cheese, the Mr. Testica loaves, Merino grated to order with a giant screeching machine. At the checkout, the young clerk packed her brown paper bags with care, placing the heavier items at the bottom. Mr. Merino handed her the final tally on a small slip of paper. Sarah opened her handbag. Not the fashionable clutch, but a larger, structured leather bag. From a plain white envelope within, she counted out the exact amount in cash. Bills that were crisp and uncreased, provided every Monday by Vinny from the household fund. She did not think about where the cash originated any more than she thought about where the electricity in her walls came from. It was a utility, a fact of her well-run life. "Thank you, Mrs. Lombardi. You have a blessed day now," Mr. Merino said, handing her the receipt. "Thank you, Mr. Merino. See you next week." She carried the bags out to the car, loading them precisely into the trunk. The sun was higher now, warming the chrome of the Bel Air's bumper. As she slid back behind the wheel, she caught a glimpse of herself in the window reflection. A composed woman in a smart shirt-waist dress, her groceries secured, her errands completed. The market, with its smells and codes and careful conversations, was just another room in the extensive house of her life, a room she navigated with flawless, untroubled grace. She started the car, the powerful engine humming its smooth song, and guided the vehicle back onto the sun-dappled street, leaving the quiet commerce of Main Street in her wake, carrying its tangible yields and its intangible understandings back to the Order of Willow Lane. Bei Tüten standen in einer ordentlichen Reihe auf der speckigen Arbeitsplatte Brownie Papierking aufrecht wie Soldaten. Sarah zog ihre Handschuhe aus Finger für Finger und legte sie beiseite. Dann begann die Zeremonie des Auspackens. Jeder Gegenstand wurde befreit, noch einmal inspiziert und an seinen vorherbestimmten Platz in Speisekammer oder Kühlschrank getragen. Die Tomaten fanden Ruhe in der kühlen Steinsortschale auf der Anricht. Das Olivenöl wurde im Schrank neben dem Herd aufgestellt. Das in Papier gewickelte Fleischpaket wartete im Eisschrank auf seine Bestimmung am Sonntag. Ihre Bewegungen waren methodisch, präzise, ein ruhiges Gegenstück zum geschäftigen Treiben im Laden. Mit jedem eingeräumten Artikel festigte sich die beruhigende Ordnung ihres Heims ein wenig mehr. Während sie arbeitete, wanderten ihre Gedanken zu unserem Aufschlag in ihre Handtasche. Er war jetzt dünner, die nistenden Schein gegen materielle Güter eingetauscht. Es gab unausgesprochene Regeln, die diesen Umschlag und alles, was er repräsentierte. Regeln. Man fragte nie nach der Quelle. Man zeigte sich wohl situiert, aber nie protzig. Der neue Kühlschrank war erst klassig, aber nicht der teuerste auf dem Markt. Das Auto war makellos gepflegt, aber nicht auffällig verchromt. Wohlstand war ein Zeichen von gutem Geschmack und harter Arbeit, nicht von Überschwang. Sie verstand diese Nuancen instinktiv, wie sie die genaue Gartzeit für Rippchen verstand. Es war eine Frage des Maßes, der Wahrung des Erscheinungsbildes. Die Nachbarn auf der Willow Lane schätzten solide Erfolge neidlos, vorausgesetzt, sie wurden mit diskreter Bescheidenheit zur Schau gestellt. Ein lautes, aufdringliches Auto hätte Misstrauen und Klatsch ausgelöst. Ihr stiller, perfekter Chevrolet hingegen erntete anerkennende Blicke. Die letzte Tüte war geleert, zusammengefaltet und für die spätere Wiederverwendung in den Schrank unter der Spüle gelegt. Es war Zeit für ihr eigenes, einfaches Mittagessen. Sie schnitt eine Scheibe von dem gestern gebackenen Sauerteigbrot, bestrich sie mit einer dünnen Schicht Butter und legte eine Scheibe des gekochten Schinkens darauf, der für Tommys Brotdose übrig geblieben war. Sie füllte ein Glas mit Leitungswasser und setzte sich an den sauberen Küchentisch. Mit einer freien Hand drehte sie am Radio auf der Anrichter. Es neckte und surrte, bevor sich die sehnsüchtigen Violinen einer Seifenoper ausbreiteten. The Guiding Light flutete in den Raum, eine Geschichte von unerlaubter Leidenschaft und tragischen Missverständnissen in einer fernen Stadt. Surikote ihr Brot und hörte zu, nicht wirklich mitfühlend, sondern fasziniert von der plumpen Direktheit der Dramen. Die Probleme der Charakter wurden ausgesprochen, ausgerufen, in langen Monologen ausgebreitet. Es war eine seltsame, fast exotische Vorstellung. In ihrer Welt wurden die wichtigsten Dinge nie ausgesprochen. Sie wurden in den Raum zwischen den Worten gelegt, in ein beiläufiges Nicken, in die Valve eines bestimmten Metzgers oder in die Art, wie man eine Rechnung bezahlte. Das Schrillklingeln des Telefons auf dem Flirtisch durchschnitt die Radiomelodramatik. Sarah stand auf, wischte sich mit einer Serviette die Finger ab und ging hinüber, den Hörer abzunehmen. »Hallo, Serafina? Bist du das?« Die Stimme war rau, vertraut, gefärbt von einem Akzent, den die Vororte nie ganz abgeschliffen hatten. »Maria, ihre Schwiegermutter?« »Ja, Maria. Wie geht es Ihnen?« »Ach, was soll mir schon fehlen? Die Hüfte macht Ärger, wenn es regnet. Aber das ist das Alter. Ein kurzes, kehliges Lachen. Ich rufe wegen der Gravy an. Für Sonntag hast du die Tomaten schon. Die guten aus der Dose, die ich dir gesagt habe. Nicht diese wässrigen Dinger aus dem Supermarkt. Sarah lehnte sich gegen die Wand, die Telefonschnur um ihren Finger gewickelt. »Ja, Maria, ich hab sie heute Morgen geekelt«, da San Marzano. Und frische Basilikenblätter aus dem Garten. Ein zufriedenes Grunzen kam über die Leitung. »Gut, gut, du lernst. Und die Rippchen, du lässt sie nicht zu schnell anbraten. Langsam, bis sie eine schöne Kruste haben. Das ist der Geschmack. Die Unterhaltung war ein sanfter Tanz aus familiärer Pflicht und kulinarischem Dogma. Maria war eine Säule der alten Nachbarschaft in Brooklyn. Eine Frau, deren Autorität in ihrer Gravy und ihrer unbeugsamen Loyalität verwurzelt war. Jeder Anruf war eine Inspektion, eine sanfte Bestätigung, dass Tommy richtig erzogen wurde, dass die Tradition gewahrt blieben, dass Sarah ihren Platz in dem Gefüge, in das sie eingeheiratet hatte, nicht vergaß. »Tommy hilft mir beim Tischdecken«, sagte Sarah und bot ein Stück anerkannter Tugenden. »Das ist gut. Ein Junge muss Respekt vor der Familie lernen. Respekt vor dem, was sein Vater aufbaut.« Marias Tonfall veränderte sich kaum, aber die Worte bekamen Gewicht. In dieser Welt, Serafina, ist die Familie alles. Was draus passiert, das ist Geschäft. Aber hier um den Tisch herum, das ist das Wahre. Da hält man zusammen, man stellt keine Fragen, die nicht nötig sind. Man sorgt für ein ruhiges Zuhause. Ein Mann, der ein ruhiges Zuhause hat, kann klar denken. Die Worte waren keine direkte Warnung. Sie waren in Ratschläge zum Schmoren von Fleisch eingewoben, getarnt als allgemeine Lebensweisheit. Sarah schloss die Augen für einen Moment. Durch das Fenster im Flur sah sie die ruhige, sonnenbeschienene Willow Lane, die perfekte Stille. Sie hörte die unausgesprochene Botschaft. Loyalität war das höchste Gut. Neugierde war ein Luxus, den man sich nicht leisten konnte. Ein ruhiges Zuhause war nicht nur ein Komfort, es war eine Notwendigkeit, ein Schutz. »Ich verstehe, Maria«, sagte sie leise, ihre Stimme so glatt wie die Oberfläche ihres polierten Küchentisch. »Natürlich verstehst du. Du bist ein gutes Mädchen.« Die Stimmung hellte sich wieder auf. »Bring mir am Sonntag ein paar von deinen Basilikumblättern. Meine sehen nicht so gut aus dieses Jahr. Und Serafina, ja, vergiss nicht, eine Zwiebel ganz mitzukaufen. Für den Geschmack. Und dann wirfst du sie weg, wenn sie ihre Arbeit getan hat. Siehst du, man nimmt, was man braucht, und lässt den Rest zurück. Das ist das Geheimnis.« Sie sprachen noch eine Minute über die Cousine in New Jersey und ihre Gallenblasenprobleme. Dann verabschiedeten sie sich. Sarah hing den Hörer auf und blieb einen Moment stehen. Der Flur war kühl und still, die Wohnung sanft wie ein Samthandschuh, lag nun in der Luft, vermischt mit dem Duft nach Brot und dem fernen Gemurmel des Radios. Sie kehrte in die Küche zurück, spülte ihren Teller ab und trocknete ihn ab. Sie drehte das Radio leiser, bis die Seifenoper nur noch ein undeutliches Murmel war. Draußen fuhr der Postboot vorbei. Ein vertrautes Geräusch des Nachmittags. Sie ging zum Fenster und sah zu, wie er einen Stapelbriefie in den Schlitz der Familie Henderson warf. Alles war normal, geordnet, still. Die Oblique-Unterhaltung mit Maria war einfach ein weiterer Bestandteil dieser Ordnung. Ein Hinweis auf die unsichtbaren Mauern, die ihr makelloses Haus umgaben. Sie atmete tief durch, richtete das Geschirrtuch ordentlich über den Haken und wandte sich der nächsten Aufgabe zu, den Bügeln von Winnies Hemden. Die Hitze des Bügeleisens, der Geruch von heißer Stärke, die Befriedigung, wenn ein perfekter, messerscharfer Saum entstand. Das waren greifbar, kontrollierbare Dinge. Sie konzentrierte sich darauf, ließ die anderen Gedanken wie die unnötige Zwiebel in Marias Gravy verschwinden. Nachdem sie ihren Geschmack abgegeben hatte, the parish hall of Santain, Anthony smelled of lemon oil, weak coffee, and the faint, sweet dust that rises from old hymnals. Sarah arrived precisely 5 minutes before the 2 o'clock meeting, her leather handbag matching her sensible low-heeled pumps. She wore a tailored navy dress with a single strand of pearls, an ensemble that communicated respectability without drawing undue attention. The room was a study in muted tones, beige walls, a scuffed linoleum floor, long folding tables arranged in a U-shape. Already a dozen women were settled on the metal folding chairs, their voices a soft, murmuring hum like bees in a hive. This was the altar society, the beating heart of the parish's domestic spirituality, and Sarah was its treasurer. She took her accustomed seat near the head of the table, next to Mrs. O'Hara, the president. Mrs. O'Hara was a woman of formidable bosom and iron-grey curls, whose organisational prowess was legendary. She presided over the meeting with a gavel fashioned from a repurposed candlestick. Sarah withdrew a slim black ledger and a mechanical pencil from her bag, laying them neatly on the table before her. The ledger contained the society's finances in her meticulous looping script. Every cent for flowers, candles and vestment repairs accounted for. It was a position of profound trust, a signal that Cyril Lombardi was a woman of discretion and reliability, her family solid and above reproach. The meeting commenced with a prayer, all heads bowed, the collective whisper filling the room. Then began the slow, intricate dance of 1950s parish politics. The first order of business was the upcoming spring bazaar. Debate swirled around the merits of a cakewalk versus a white elephant sale. Mrs. Miss Finnegan, a woman with a perpetually worried expression, advocated for a quilt raffle, detailing the hours of stitching by the ladies' auxiliary. Sarah listened, her face a mask of polite attentiveness, her fingers resting lightly on her closed ledger. She offered no opinion until directly asked. "And what does our treasurer think?" Can we afford the prizes for a quilt raffle, or should we stick to the cakewalk? The cakewalk is simpler, Mrs. O'Hara finally inquired, turning her magnified eyes behind thick glasses towards Sarah. Sarah opened the ledger, ran a finger down a column of figures. The cakewalk has lower overhead, she said, her voice clear and soft. But a quilt raffle could generate more revenue if we promote it properly. Perhaps a compromise. We could have the cakewalk for the children and a separate raffle for the quilt. The initial outlay would be modest, and the ledger shows we have a small surplus from the Christmas poinsettia sale that could cover it. Her suggestion was neither too bold nor too timid. It acknowledged both sides, offered a practical solution, and demonstrated fiscal responsibility. A murmur of approval rippled through the table. The motion was seconded and passed. Sarah made a neat note in the ledger. The conversation mended to the pressing issue of new vestments for the altar boys. The current cassocks were fraying at the cuffs. Father Donnelly had mentioned it in passing, a hint that was as good as a command. The discussion, however, became mired in the swamp of fabric choices. Should they be a classic black serge or a more durable modern blend? Mrs. Gable, whose husband owned the department store downtown, pushed for a fine wool blend, extolling its virtues. Another woman, whose son was an altar boy, worried about summer heat and suggested a lighter cotton. Sarah watched the back and forth, the gentle clash of preferences disguised as practical concerns. She waited for a lull. "Might I suggest," she interposed softly, "that we consult with Sister Agnes? She's the one who does the mending. She would have the best sense of what wears well and what is most practical for the boys. We could then take her recommendation to the next meeting." It was a masterstroke of soft diplomacy. It deferred to ecclesiastical authority, sidestepped the personal preferences of the women, and kicked the decision down the road just enough to let tempers cool. Mrs. O'Hara nodded vigorously. "An excellent idea, Sarah. Sister Agnes knows best." The meeting's climax, such as it was, arrived with the renovation fund. Father Donnelly wished to repaint the sacristy, a small windowless room that smelled of incense and candle wax. The diocesan funds were stretched thin. A special collection had been announced. Mrs. O'Hara passed around a metal lockbox, its slit top promising anonymity. "Whatever you can spare, ladies. Every little bit helps." The box made its way around the table with a series of soft clinks and rustles. When it reached Sarah, she did not fumble in her coin purse. Instead, she reached into her handbag and withdrew a plain white envelope. Unmarked, she slipped it through the slot without a sound. It contained 5 $20 bills, a sum that represented a significant portion of the household envelope for the week. It was an anonymous donation, but in the close-knit ecosystem of the Altar Society, anonymity was a polite fiction. Mrs. O'Hara, who received the box next, felt its sudden weight. Her eyes met Sarah's for a brief, knowing moment. She gave an almost imperceptible nod before passing the box along. The final agenda item was the most contentious of the afternoon. The flavour of the coffee cake to be served after the 9 o'clock Mass next Sunday. Was cinnamon sugar too pedestrian? Was a sour cream walnut cake too extravagant? The debate was heated in the way only such trivialities can be, a safe outlet for energies with nowhere else to go. Sarah sipped her coffee from a thick porcelain cup, the brew weak and lukewarm. She let the voices wash over her, the tactile pleasures of the moment anchoring her, the smooth grain of the wooden table under her fingertips, the starched crispness of the linen napkin in her lap, the crumbling sweetness of a store-bought butter cookie that melted on her tongue. She voted for cinnamon sugar, the safe, traditional choice. It passed. By 3:30, the meeting adjourned. The women gathered their things, the chatter turning to children and recipes. Mrs. O'Hara clasped Sarah's hand as she rose. "Thank you, my dear. Your contribution to the renovation fund will be a great help. Father will be so pleased." The emphasis was delicate, the gratitude genuine. It solidified standing. This quiet generosity, it said the Lombardists were not only respectable, but also benefactors, woven into the fabric of the parish in the most unassailable way. Sarah drove home in the late afternoon light, the meeting settling into her like a soothing balm. It had been a performance of normalcy, of belonging, conducted on a stage of linen and ledger books. The cash in the envelope was not a bribe, it was a tithe to this world of order, an investment in the pristine surface of her life. The taste of weak coffee and polite consensus lingered on her palate, a flavour as familiar and necessary as home. She turned onto Willow Lane, where the houses sat in quiet, well-kept rows, their secrets tucked away behind identical, smiling facades, just like the unmarked envelope in the heavy metal box. The Sunday sun, a pale and forgiving gold, streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating a universe of suspended dust motes above the stove. This was Sorère's cathedral, and today's mass was the making of the gravy. The word sauce was never used. This was gravy, a substantive, almost holy reduction of time, patience, and lineage. She had risen an hour earlier than usual, the house still wrapped in the deep, woolly silence of pre-dawn, to begin her preparations. Now, clad in a simple cotton house dress protected by a crisp white apron, she stood before the great enamelled pot, a vessel of such formidable size and weight it seemed less a kitchen tool and more an ancestral altar. First, the meat. From the icebox, she retrieved the package from Mr. Marino. Unwrapping the butcher paper was like revealing a treasure. The pale, fatty ribs in their curved rack, the plump links of sweet sausage, their casings pinched at intervals. She patted them dry with a clean tea towel, the ritualistic prelude to the sacrament of browning. A generous glug of the imported olive oil hit the bottom of the pot, shimmering as it warmed. She laid the ribs in first, the sound a fierce, joyful sizzle that shattered the morning calm. She did not crowd them. Each piece needed its own space to caramelize properly. The aroma that rose was primal and promising. The smell of fat meeting heat, of protein transforming. She turned them with long-handled tongs, patient and attentive, until every surface was seared a deep mahogany brown, a crust that held the promise of profound flavour. The sausages followed, their skins blistering and snapping, filling the kitchen with a peppery fennel-scented smoke. Removing the meat to a waiting platter, she turned her attention to the foundation. Into the rendered fat and fond, she scraped a mound of finely minced yellow onion. It hissed and softened, turning translucent, then taking on a pale gold hue. 2 cloves of garlic, crushed under the broadside of her knife and minced to a paste, joined the onion, their pungent sharpness mellowing instantly in the hot oil. This was the holy trinity of aroma, the base upon which everything else would rest. She stirred with a wooden spoon, her movements rhythmic and meditative. From the garden that morning, she had clipped a handful of basil, its leaves vibrant green and smelling of sun-warmed licorice. She rinsed them gently, patted them dry, and set them aside. Now she reached for the cans of San Marazzo tomatoes. Using the manual crusher clamped to the edge of a bowl, she fed the whole tomatoes into its maw, turning the crank with a steady, firm hand. The flesh yielded with a wet, squelching protest, emerging as a thick, seedy pulp. This, too, went into the pot, a glorious, violent red cascade that quenched the sizzling onions and garlic. She added a pinch of salt, a smaller one of sugar to balance the tomato's acidity, and the basil leaves, torn, not cut, to release their oils. Only then did she return the meat to the pot, nestling the ribs and sausages into the crimson depths. She poured in a cup of water to loosen the treasure stuck to the bottom, stirred once more with a solemn finality, and reduced the flame to the merest whisper of blue. A lid, slightly ajar to allow for the slow escape of steam, settled onto the pot with a definitive clang. The first, most active phase was complete. Now began the long, slow vigil. As the morning stretched into afternoon, the gravy began its metamorphosis. The furious bubbling subsided into a lazy, occasional blup. The red deepened, concentrating, taking on the richer, browner tones of a well-worn brick. The fat from the meat rose in shimmering, golden pools on the surface. The aroma evolved from sharp and acidic to something profound, comforting and complex, a smell that spoke of patience, of care, of a home where such things were possible. It filled the kitchen, then seeped into the dining room, the living room, the very walls of the house, a fragrant announcement of impending communion. Tommy, drawn by the scent like a small, eager pilgrim, appeared in the doorway. "Smells good, Ma. It needs time," she said, her voice soft. "You can help. Set the table." She handed him the good linen tablecloth, the one reserved for Sundays and holidays. She watched as he spread it with more enthusiasm than precision, the heavy fabric billowing like a sail. She guided him in placing the china plates, the heavy silverware, the water glasses that caught the afternoon light. His small, serious face, as he counted out the forks, was a portrait of absorbed duty. This, too, was part of the ritual, the passing on of order, the inclusion in the craft. The front door opened and closed earlier than expected. Vinny's footsteps in the hall were heavier, slower than usual. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his suit jacket, his hat in his hand. His face looked tired, the lines around his mouth etched a little deeper. He said nothing, just stood for a moment, breathing in the rich, enveloping scent. Sarah, stirring the pot with her back to him, felt his presence, a quiet, solid weight at her periphery. He moved to his chair at the kitchen table, shrugged off his jacket, and loosened his tie. From his breast pocket he produced a cigar, a fat, expensive-looking one. He clipped the end, struck a match, and rotated the tip in the flame until it glowed evenly. The first puff released a cloud of fragrant blue smoke that mingled with the gravy-scented air, not competing but complementing it, a masculine note in the domestic symphony. He did not read the paper, he did not speak. He simply sat, smoking, and watched her cook. This was his version of domestic contentment, his sign of profound peace. The quiet husband, home early, finding solace in the sight of his wife at the stove and the smell of the family gravy. Sarah felt his gaze, a tangible warmth on her back. She did not turn around, did not break the spell with questions about his day or his unusual quiet. She simply lifted the lid to give the gravy a final stir, the steam blooming in a fragrant cloud around her face. The sound of the wooden spoon scraping the bottom of the pot, the soft hiss of the simmer, the ticking of the wall clock, the occasional draw on Vinny's cigar. These were the only sounds in the warm, fragrant kitchen. It was a perfect, silent understanding. Here, in this room, with this pot between them, there were no meetings in the city, no envelopes, no unspoken rules. There was only this, the transformation of simple ingredients into something that would nourish and bind. It was her art form, her therapy, and her most powerful language. And his silent cigar-smoking vigil was the highest praise he could offer, an acknowledgement of the sanctuary she built for him every day, brick by brick, simmer by slow simmer. The gravy, now thick and velvety, clung to the spoon in a rich ruddy coat. It was ready. The house, saturated with its promise, seemed to sigh in collective anticipation. The altar was prepared. The family would soon arrive. The doorbell chimed at precisely 1 minute past 4, a sound that sent a final, invisible tremor through the perfectly ordered house. Sarah smoothed her dress, a smart shirt dress in a deep emerald green that complemented the dining room's warm wood tones, and moved to answer it. The tableau on the front porch was one of boisterous familiarity. Vinny's 2 brothers, Frankie and Paulie, stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces broad and smiling, their Sunday suits straining slightly at the buttons. Behind them, their wives, Angela and Rose, offered waves and cheerful greetings, each holding a covered dish or a bakery box. And at the center, a small, formidable pillar in a black dress and a single strand of jet beads, stood Maria, her sharp eyes already taking inventory of the porch, the door frame, her daughter-in-law. "You're letting the flies in, Serafina," Maria announced by way of greeting, brushing past her into the hall. The others followed in a wave of laughter, cheek kisses, and the rustle of good coats. The quiet sanctuary of Willow Lane was instantly, thoroughly invaded by the robust energy of family. The dining table was a masterpiece of mid-century abundance. The good linen cloth, corrected by Sarah after Tommy's efforts, gleamed under the light of the crystal chandelier. The Lombardi family china, a pattern of delicate gold vines on ivory, was set at each place. Water glasses sparkled, and a cut glass pitcher of ice water sweated gently in the center. Serving platters and bowls waited, empty yet promising. Around the periphery, the true star, however, sat enthroned at Sarah's place at the foot of the table. The massive pot of gravy, now transferred to a vast, shallow serving bowl, its surface a deep, glistening mahogany studded with the glistening ribs and sausages. A mountain of cooked spaghetti waited in a separate bowl, and a plate heaped with grated parmesan completed the altar. The family settled into their assigned seats with the ease of long practice. Vinny sat at the head, Frankie to his right, Paulie to his left. Maria was placed to Vinny's immediate right, a position of honour and proximity. The wives and Tommy filled the remaining chairs. A cacophony of conversation erupted even before the food was served, a loud overlapping symphony of voices. Frankie, the mad, eldest brother with a voice like gravel in a tin can, held forth on the Dodgers' latest loss, dissecting the pitcher's performance with the gravity of a military strategist. Paulie, leaner and more animated, interrupted to extol the virtues of his new DeSoto Fireflight, describing its horsepower and tail fins with the reverence of a poet. "She's a beauty, Vin, rides like a cloud. You should come by the lot. I could talk to the manager for you." The offer was casual, but the glance that passed between the brothers was not. Vinny nodded, taking a slow sip of his red wine, maybe after the quarter closes. Things are tight with the new warehouse contracts. The phrase warehouse contracts was dropped into the conversation like a stone into a pond, creating ripples of understanding nods. No one asked for details. It was just business. Sarah, meanwhile, was the silent conductor of the meal's service. With a subtle nod, she prompted Tommy to pass the bread basket. She caught Angela's eye and gestured with her chin toward the butter dish before it was requested. She rose smoothly to lift the heavy bowl of spaghetti, serving Maria first, then circling the table, her movements economical and graceful. She ladled the rich gravy over each portion, ensuring every plate received a sausage and a piece of falling off the bone rib. The women, Angela and Rose, offered effusive compliments on the food, the table, the house. Their praise was genuine, woven with threads of unspoken solidarity. They too had performed this Sunday ritual in their own homes. The humour was gentle, stemming from well-worn family quirks. Frankie told a long rambling story about a stubborn plumbing leak that ended with him flooded and cursing in a language that made Maria click her tongue and hide a smile. Paulie teased Tommy about a girl in his class, sending the boy into a blush that spread from his collar to his hairline. Maria held court, offering pronouncements on everything from the proper consistency of gravy, approved with a slow nod, to the scandalous length of modern teenagers' skirts. Through it all, Sarah navigated, refilling water glasses, offering second helpings, clearing empty dishes with a quiet efficiency that kept the feast flowing seamlessly. Her own plate grew cool as she tended to others, but this was part of her role, a fasting of sorts that fed her in a different way. As the last bites of spumoni ice cream were finished and coffee cups were drained, the ancient, unchallenged ritual of separation began. Vinny pushed back his chair, patted his stomach with a contented sigh, and extracted a cigar. Frankie and Paulie followed suit, rising as one unit. "Let's let the womenfolk handle the wreckage," Frankie boomed, though his tone was affectionate. The three brothers and Tommy, now included in the masculine fold, filed out of the dining room toward the den, the sound of their voices and the scent of cigar smoke trailing behind them. In the dining room a different quiet descended. It was not the quiet of the empty morning kitchen, but a busy, companionable silence. Angela and Rose began gathering plates with the practiced ease of fellow initiates. Maria remained seated for a moment, watching, her eyes missing nothing. Then she stood, not to help clear, but to supervise. She directed Rose on the stacking of china, warned Angela about letting the silverware clatter. Sarah filled the sink with hot, soapy water, the steam rising in a cloud. This was their domain now, this sea of soiled linen and greasy plates. No one questioned the custom. It was as natural as the sun setting. The men discussed business, sports, cars, the world of action and transaction. The women restored order, cleansed, reset the stage for the next act of domestic life. The conversation here was different, softer, focused on children's coughs, a sale on percale sheets, a recipe for lemon bars. It was a space of shared, uncomplaining labour. Sarah washed, Angela dried, Rose put away. Maria wiped the table with a damp cloth, her movements slow and deliberate, erasing all traces of the meal. From the den, a burst of male laughter rolled down the hall, deep and full-throated. In the kitchen, Angela smiled, shaking her head. Those boys. It was a statement of fond resignation, an acceptance of the way things were and always would be. Sarah, her hands submerged in the warm, sudsy water, felt the familiar contours of a plate. She scrubbed at a spot of dried gravy, her mind not on the men's laughter or the women's talk, but on the simple, cyclical rightness of the moment. The feast had been consumed, the family bonded, the roles performed. Now the cleaning, then the quiet. It was the rhythm of her life, unchallenged and in its way deeply comforting. The separation was not a wall, it was the hinge that allowed the door of their world to swing smoothly on its well-oiled track, generation after generation. She handed a clean, dripping plate to Angela, who accepted it with a smile, and together, in the warm, damp kitchen, they made everything spotless again. Dienstag, ein Wort ohne Glanz, ohne Erwartung, ein solider, grauer Baustein, im Fundament der Woche. Sarah stand in der Waschküche, einem kleinen, nach Chlor und heißem Metall riechenden Raum neben der Küche und betrachtete den Berg schmutziger Wäsche. Es war kein Berg der Verzweiflung, sondern eine geordnete Herausforderung, eine Liste von Aufgaben, die sie erhaken würde. Das Licht fiel durch ein einziges hohes Fenster, ließ die Staubteilchen über ihre neuen Errungenschaft tanzen. Der elektrischen Wringermaschine. Sie war ein monströses, wunderschönes Ding, aus weißem mailliertem Stahl und Chrom, mit zwei Becken und den gewaltigen Gummi. Welten die Kleidung mit mechanischer Unerbittlichkeit auspressten. Winnie hatte sie im letzten Monat überraschend mitgebracht. Ein Geschenk, das die harte Arbeit erleichtern sollte. Sie betrachtete sie mit gemischten Gefühlen. Sie bewunderte ihre Effizienz, aber vermisste manchmal den ruhigen, meditativen Rhythmus des Handwaschens und Auswindens. Zuerst das Sortieren, Weißes von Buntem, Leichtes vom Schwerem. Winnies weiße Baumwollhemden, eine steife, aufrechte Armee, wurden in einem separaten Stapel abgelegt. Tommys schlammverkrusteten Hosen und Socken kamen in eine andere Ecke. Die Bettlaken, die Handtücher, ihre eigenen Blusen und Hauskleider. Jede Kategorie hatte ihren Platz. Sie füllte das linke Becken mit heißem Wasser aus dem Schlauch, das klatschend und zischend einlief, und gab eine sorgfältig abgemessene Kappe voller pulverförmigem Waschmittels hinzu, das einen scharfen, sauberen Zitronengeruch verströmte. Dann begann sie, die weiße Wäsche einzutauchen, mit einem hölzernen Waschbrett gegen die widerständigen Stellen zu schrubben. Ein rhythmisches Schrubben. Scrub, das den Raum erfüllte. Der Dampf stieg ihr ins Gesicht, lockerte die sorgfältig gestillten Locken an ihren Schläfen. Nach dem Einweichen und Schrubben kam die eigentliche Arbeit der Maschine. Sie legte ein nasses Hemd über die Walzen, drehte den großen Hebel an der Seite. Mit einem tiefen, surrenden Brummen bewegten sich die Walzen aufeinander zu, erfassten den Stoff und zogen ihn durch, pressten das schmutzige Wasser in einem ergiebigen Strom in das Auffangbecken darunter. Der Vorgang war faszinierend und ein wenig beängstigend in seiner Kraft. Man musste aufpassen, dass Ärmel oder Schnüre nicht mit hineingezogen wurden. Sarah führte jedes Stück mit konzentrierter Präzision ein, ihre Hände geschickt und sicher. Das gequetschte, fast trocken Hemd kam auf der anderen Seite heraus, steif und warm, und fiel in das Restespülbecken, das mit klarem, kaltem Wasser gefüllt war. Hier spülte sie es noch einmal durch, bevor sie es erneut durch die Walzen schickte, diesmal um das letzte Wasser zu entfernen. Dann ging es nach draußen in den hinteren Garten, wo die Wäscheschleune zwischen zwei starken Pfählen gespannt war. Die frische Mailuft roch nach frisch gemähtem Gras und dem Fliederbusch an der Grundstücksgrenze. Mit einer Schar Holzwäscheklammern am Mund arbeitete sie sich. Von einem Ende der Leine zum anderen hing jedes Hemd, jedes Laken, jedes Hemdtuch auf. Sie schüttelte Jedes Stück einmal kräftig aus, bevor sie es festdeckte. Ein Ruck, der die Falten glättete und den Stoff zum Atmen brachte. Die weiße Wäsche flatterte im leichten Wind wie eine Reihe friedlicher Flaggen, ein öffentliches Bekenntnis zur Sauberkeit und Ordnung. Vom Haus nebenan klang das gleiche, vertraute Geräusch, das Knarren einer Leine, das Klappen von Klammern, eine Symphonie der Häuslichkeit. Zurück im Haus, während die Wäsche in der Sonne trocknete, richtete sie das Bügelbrett auf. Das Bügeln von Winnies Hemden war eine eigene, fast zeremonielle Kunst. Sie mischte die flüssige Stärke nach einem Verhältnis mit Wasser in eine Sprühflasche. Jedis noch leicht feuchte Hemd wurde gleichmäßig besprüht, dann sorgfältig auseinandergefaltet. Das Bügeleisen, ein schweres Gerät aus Gusseisen mit abnehmbarem Griff, heizte auf der Herdplatte. Auf sie testete die Temperatur mit einem nassen Finger, der auf der Metallsohle tischte. Dann begann sie. Zuerst die Manschetten und das Kragenband, dann die Schultern, die Ärmel, die Vorder- und Rückseite. Sie zog den Stoff straff, glättete ihn mit der flachen Hand, bevor das Eisen darüber vor, wobei ein zufriedenes Zischen und ein Geruch nach heißer Baumwolle und Stärke entstand. Die gewünschte Steifigkeit war spezifisch, steif genug, Autorität auszustrahlen, aber nicht so steif, dass sie unangenehm zu tragen war. Es war ein Balanceakt, den sie perfektioniert hatte. Ein Stapel perfekt gebügelter Hemdworks neben ihr, jedes ein weißes Rechteck makelloser Disziplin. Das Klopfen an der Hintertür unterbrach die Stille kurz nach 3 Uhr. Lucy Carmichael stand auf der Schwelle, ein Table mit einem mit einem Neckeltuch bedeckten Teller in den Händen. Lucys Lächeln war breit und unkompliziert, ihr Haar zu einer lockeren Rolle frisiert. Ich habe einen neuen Apfelkuchen ausprobiert. Dachte ich bringe dir eine Probe, bevor ich ihn meiner unkritischen Familie zum Opfer bringe. Sarah lächelte zurück. Eine echte, entspannte Geste. Lucy war eine der wenigen, bei deren Besuch sie nicht das Gefühl hatte, eine Vorstellung geben zu müssen. Sie bereitete Tee zu, entkoffeinierten, und sie setzten sich an den Küchentisch, während der Kuchen, noch warm und von Zimt duftend, zwischen ihnen stand. Die Wäsche flattert wie eine Flotte, bemerkte Lucy und nickte zum Garten hinaus. Die neue Maschine ist ein Traum, oder? Fred sagt. Kauft mir auch so, bald der Bonus von diesem neuen Highway-Projekt kommt. Sie rollte die Augen, aber ihre Stimme war gespannt. Diese ganze Interstate-Wahnsinn, sie schneiden jetzt durch die Sümpfe hinter Jersey. Freds Firma liefert den Betten. Er sagt, es ist wie ein Goldrausch da draußen. So viele interessierte Parteien. Das Wort hin in der Luft zwischen den Tassen und den Teller. Interessierte Parteien. Es war ein Euphemismus, so dick wie die Stärke in Vinnys Hemdkragen. Lucy sprach nicht weiter, aber ihr Blick war wissend und ein wenig besorgt. Sie wusste, dass Freds kleine Baufirma solche Großaufträge nicht einfach so bekam. Sie wusste, dass Vinnys Import-Export Geschäft manchmal mit Männern zu tun hatte, die in solchen Projekten interessiert waren. Es war eine vorsichtige Andeutung, ein vorsichtiges Ausläuten, ob Sarah ähnliche Sorgen hatte. Sarah nahm einen kleinen Bissen Kuchen. Er war ausgezeichnet, süß und säuerlich. Sie schob das Thema sanft beiseite, wie sie einen Krümel von der Tischdecke wischte. Der Kuchen ist himmlisch, Lucy, danke. Und wie laufen die Vorbereitungen für Susans Hochzeit? Habt ihr schon eine Location für die Feier? Lucys Gesicht hellte sich sofort auf, das unangenehme Thema vergessen. Sie tauchte ein in Details über Saalmieten, Menüproben und den Kampf mit der Schwiegermutter in Speer über die Blumenarrangements. Sarah hörte zu, nickte, gab sanfte Ratschläge. Sie lenkte das Gespräch in die sicheren, ruhigen Gewässer von Tull und Tränen der Freude, von Kuchengeschmack und Sitzordnungen. Es war eine bewusste Umleitung, eine Verteidigung der friedlichen Atmosphäre an ihrem Küchentisch. Sie wollte nicht über Highways und Interessen sprechen. Sie wollte über etwas sprechen, das greifbar und rein war, wie die auf der Leine flatternd weiße Wäsche. Nach einer Stunde stand Lucy auf, um ihre Familie zu Hause zu versorgen. Sarah begleitete sie zur Tür, dankte ihr noch einmal für den Kuchen. Als sie allein war, kehrte sie in die Waschküche zurück. Die Wäsche draußen war fast trocken, die Hände bewegten sich träge im Nachmittagswind. Sie begann sie abzunehmen, fühlte die sonnenwarme, steife Baumwolle. Sie faltete jedes Stück sorgfältig, legte es in den weiten Korb. Die rhythmische, repetitive Natur der Arbeit war tröstlich. Jede Bewegung war vorhersehbar, jedes Ergebnis sicher. Sortieren, washing, ausringen, aufhängen, Bügel, falten. Ein Kreislauf ohne Überraschungen, ohne angenehme Anjutungen. Der Besuch von Lucy mit seinem kurzen Schatten eines Themas, das sie nicht erkunden wollte, war nur eine kleine Unterbrechung gewesen, ein leichter Windstoß, der die Wäscheleitern zum Schwingen brachte. Jetzt, wo die Stille zurückkehrte, füllt nur vom leisen Summen des Kühlschranks und dem befriedigenden Geräusch sauberer, gefalteter Baumwolle, die sie stapelte. Sie trug den Wollenkorb ins Haus, ihr Reich wiederhergestellt, ihre Welt wieder auf ihren bekannten, geradlinigen Pfaden. Der Dienstag näherte sich seinem Ende, seine gewöhnlichen Pflichten erfüllt, seine Oberfläche ungetrübt und glatt. The scent of Lucy's apple cake still lingered in the kitchen, a sweet domestic ghost, when the heavier sound of Vinny's Oldsmobile announced his return. It was later than his usual Tuesday homecoming. The shadows in the backyard had stretched long and thin, and Sarah had already put away the last of the iron shirts. She heard the car door thud shut, then his footsteps on the front walk, firm, measured, carrying a weight that seemed more than physical. She was at the sink, rinsing the final teacup, when he entered through the kitchen door. He carried not his briefcase, but a small rectangular box wrapped in thick ivory paper and tied with a slender gold ribbon. The paper was embossed with a discreet, elegant logo, La Perla Fine Jewelers, downtown. He placed the box on the formica counter beside her. The gesture neither tender nor ceremonial, but definitive, like stamping a document. He said nothing, simply stood there, his overcoat still on, his hat shadowing his eyes. The air in the kitchen, so recently filled with the harmless chatter of weddings, seemed to cool and thicken. Sarah turned off the tap, dried her hands meticulously on her apron, and then turned to face the offering. She did not look at his face, but at the box. It was too beautiful, too deliberate. Gifts from Vinny were rare and always significant. They were never requested and never frivolous. "Thank you, Vinny," she said, her voice a calm, smooth pull. She untied the ribbon, which slipped away like silk, and carefully peeled back the thick paper, revealing a velvet case of deepest midnight blue. The hinge opened with a soft, expensive click. Nestled inside, against a bed of white satin, lay a single strand of pearls. They were not the small, modest beads of her everyday strand from the 5 and dime, but substantial, luminous orbs with a roseate glow. The clasp a simple but heavy circle of gold. They were the kind of pearls a mayor's wife might wear, or a symphony patron. They spoke of a prosperity that was meant to be seen, but only in the right circles. She lifted the necklace from its case. The pearls were cool and surprisingly heavy in her palm, each one a perfect closed world. "They're beautiful," she said, and meant it. The beauty was objective, undeniable. She held them up to the light from the window, watching the soft iridescence play across their surfaces. Then she turned and fastened them around her own neck, her fingers deft with the clasp. The weight was a new sensation against her collarbone. She did not ask why. She did not say, "What's the occasion?" or "You shouldn't have." To ask would be to acknowledge that the gift was unusual, that it required explanation. It would be to pry open a door that was meant to remain closed. So she simply turned back to him, the pearls resting against her green shirtdress, and offered a small, accepting smile, a lovely surprise. He grunted, a sound that could have been satisfaction or dismissal. He shrugged off his overcoat, hung his hat on the peg by the door. The transaction was complete. The unrequested gift had been given and received. Its purpose, apology, distraction, a marker of some silent transaction, remaining encrypted within its perfect, lustrous form. He moved past her to pour himself a drink from the decanter in the den, the everyday ritual reasserting itself around the irregularity of the pearls. Dinner was quiet. Tommy chattered about a spelling bee, and Vinny nodded along, his responses brief. The pearls lay against Sarah's chest, a cool foreign presence throughout the meal. She was hyper-aware of their weight, a silent counterpoint to the normal sounds of cutlery on plates. After putting Tommy to bed and washing the dishes, she joined Vinny in the living room. He had fallen asleep in his armchair, the newspaper spread across his lap, a half-finished glass of amber liquid on the side table. His breathing was deep and even, the lines of his face relaxed in unconsciousness. In sleep, he looked like any tired husband. Sarah turned off the main lamp, leaving only the soft glow of a table lamp by the radio. She moved silently to the set, a large walnut console, and turned the knob. The dial glowed a warm orange as the tubes warmed up. Static hissed, then resolved into the sonorous, authoritative voice of a news broadcaster. It was the late-night recap, a litany of distant events. Trouble in Indochina, a speech by the president, the weather forecast for the northeast. She stood there, not sitting, her arms crossed lightly over her chest, listening without truly hearing, her gaze on Vinny's sleeping form. Then a name snagged her attention, hooking into a recess of her memory. The broadcaster's tone shifted slightly, becoming more pointed. In local news, the federal grand jury handed down indictments today in the ongoing investigation into waterfront union activities. Among those named is Frankie the Nail Santoro, a longtime official with the International Longshoremen's Association, on charges of extortion and conspiracy. Prosecutors allege, the voice continued, detailing charges and allegations. But Sarah had stopped processing the words. Frankie Santoro, the name echoed in the quiet room. She had heard it before, not on the radio, but murmured in the hushed, tense tones Vinny used on the telephone in his den behind a closed door. She had been passing in the hall carrying laundry, and the name had slipped through the crack under the door like a wisp of smoke. Tell Santoro it's handled. Time it had meant nothing to her then, just another piece of the opaque business world that existed parallel to her own. Now, here it was, broadcast into her living room, wrapped in the words indictment and conspiracy. The pearls felt suddenly colder, heavier, as if they had absorbed the chill from the broadcaster's voice. She did not gasp. She did not look at Vinny to see if he had stirred. With a motion as calm and decisive as folding a sheet, she leaned forward and turned the knob on the radio. The POW broadcaster's voice was cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a void of static, which she then silenced completely. The sudden quiet was profound, broken only by the tick of the mantel clock and Vinny's steady breathing. She stood in the silence for a full minute, her hand still on the radio's polished wood. Then she turned and walked out of the living room, down the dark hall. She pushed open the door to Tommy's room a crack. The nightlight cast a soft, buttery glow over his sleeping form, one arm flung over his head, his breath a gentle whisper. She watched the steady rise and fall of his small chest. A metronome of innocence, she pulled the door closed until it clicked softly. On her way back to the living room, her eye caught a slight irregularity in the dim hallway. A small framed photograph, a studio portrait of the three of them taken last Easter, hung slightly crooked on the wall. It was off by perhaps 2 degrees. Without hesitation, Sarah reached out and straightened it. Her fingers adjusted the frame with minute precision, aligning it perfectly with the horizontal line of the wainscoting below. She stepped back, surveyed her work. The frame was now true. The hallway, with its ordered doors and balanced shadows, was restored. She returned to the living room. Vinny still slept. The radio was dark. The pearls, warm now from her skin, lay against her throat. She unfastened the clasp, returned the necklace to its velvet case, and closed the lid with that same soft final click. She placed the case on the mantel next to a vase of silk hydrangeas. Tomorrow she would put it in her jewellery box. For now it was just another object in the room, its significance absorbed into the domestic landscape. She picked up the newspaper from Vinny's lap, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table beside his empty glass. She then gently shook his shoulder. "Vinny," she said, her voice low and even, "come to bed." He stirred, blinked up at her, his eyes cloudy with sleep. He nodded, pushed himself up from the chair. Together, they walked up the stairs in the dark, their footsteps familiar on the treads. In the bedroom, she hung her dress, put on her nightgown. He did the same. They slipped into their separate sides of the bed. The house settled around them, a shell of order and quiet. The news report existed now in a sealed compartment, like the velvet case on the mantel. The crooked picture had been made straight. The surface of their world, momentarily rippled by a name on a radio, was once again calm, glassy, and impeccably smooth. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of her husband's breathing returning to the rhythm of sleep, and willed her own mind into the same blank tranquility. The morning of the garden party dawned with a sky of flawless, untroubled blue, a perfect canvas for the pastel tableau Seurat intended to create. By 10 o'clock, the backyard on Willow Lane had been transformed into a stage set of mid-century serenity. The lawn, striped from Saturday's mowing, was a vibrant green carpet. Folding chairs with floral patterned cushions were arranged in conversational clusters under the dappled shade of the maple tree. A long table, covered with a lace cloth that had belonged to Maria, held the edible offerings, delicate cucumber sandwiches with the crusts precisely removed, a moulded salmon mousse, garnished with sprigs of dill, a 3-tiered stand of petit fours iced in pale pink, yellow and mint green. A silver urn percolated coffee, and a cut glass pitcher held iced tea, slices of lemon floating like tiny suspended suns. Everything was designed to whisper, not shout, of taste and effortless grace. Sarah moved among the preparations with the calm focus of a general before a meticulously planned battle. She wore a dress of dusty rose shantung silk, its full skirt swaying gently as she adjusted a vase of peonies, pink and white, of course, on the refreshment table. Her hair was swept into a soft chignon, and at her throat lay the new pearls, their substantial weight a constant cool reminder. They were the correct note of understated luxury, a testament to Vinnie's success. Without venturing into vulgarity, she surveyed the scene. It was a performance of perfect assimilation, and she was both director and star. The guests arrived in a flurry of pastel fabrics and polite exclamations. Carol Henderson led the procession in a lilac shirtwaist, followed by a half-dozen other wives from the neighborhood and the altar society. Their dresses were a symphony of mint, buttercup, and sky blue. Wide-brimmed hats shaded carefully made-up faces, the air filled with the light, floral scents of their perfumes and the soft murmur of greetings. Gloved hands were extended, cheeks were air-kissed. Sarah welcomed each woman with the same gracious, measured smile, guiding them to the table, offering coffee or tea. The conversation, like the food, was light, carefully curated, and devoid of sharp edges. It floated on the gentle breezes of the May afternoon. They discussed President Eisenhower's recent golf game, a shared admiration for his steady hand. They debated the merits of the new automatic dishwasher versus the reliability of a good pair of hands. They lamented with cheerful resignation the stubbornness of crabgrass. It was a serene study in social ritual, a ballet of pleasantries where every step was known and every turn predictable. Sarah circulated, replenishing a cup here, offering a plate of sandwiches there, her ears attuned to the subtext humming beneath the harmless words. "Your garden is simply a dream," Sarah sighed Eleanor Gable, her husband the department store owner. "My roses are plagued by black spot. I've tried everything." "It's all in the air circulation, I find," Sarah replied, her voice soothing, "and a little powdered milk around the base. It sounds odd, but it works." She offered a gardening tip as a small neutral gift, deflecting the subtle envy she detected. The deflection was a skill she employed throughout the afternoon. When Carol, sipping her iced tea, leaned in with a casually arched eyebrow, the real probe began. "And how is Vinnie?" "Harold saw his car downtown last week near the docks. That import-export business must keep him terribly busy." The question hung, delicate as a soap bubble. Sarah's smile never wavered. She lifted the silver coffee pot, its surface reflecting the dappled light. "Oh, endlessly. It's all warehouse contracts and shipping schedules. More coffee, Carol?" The pivot was seamless. She poured the steaming liquid, the act of hospitality a gentle but firm wall, against further inquiry. He was just saying how complex the new tariffs are making everything, but I'm afraid it all goes over my head. She offered a small, self-deprecating laugh, playing her assigned role, the supportive, domestically focused wife who left the complicated business of commerce to her husband. She observed the other wives as she moved among them. In some, like young Susan Bailey, new to the neighbourhood, the facade was still being constructed, her smiles a touch too eager, her laughter a note too high. In others, like the formidable Mrs. Ears, O'Hara from the Alta Society, the facade was a fortress, worn so long it had become a second skin, her conversation a masterful tapestry of parish news and benign opinion that revealed nothing. But in a few, in the quiet, watchful eyes of Angela, her sister-in-law, and in the perfectly still hands of Lucy Carmichael as she listened, Sarah recognized the same carefully maintained performance. They too knew the art of the serene smile that masked taculation, the light topic that carried unspoken weight. They were fellow custodians of calm surfaces, guardians of homes where certain questions were never asked aloud. A glance across the lawn, a slight tilt of the head while discussing hydrangeas, could speak volumes of shared understanding. The party proceeded with flawless smoothness. The sun climbed, warming the air. Bees hummed around the peonies. The pastel colours of the dresses blurred against the green of the lawn, a living impressionist painting. Sarah felt a strange detachment, as if she were floating above the scene, admiring her own handiwork. The pearls were a success. Carol had complimented them with genuine admiration, and the other women's eyes had lingered just long enough. They were a visible token of Vinnie's provision, a symbol that needed no explanation. A symbol that needed no explanation. As the clock neared 2, the party began its gentle wind down. Compliments were reiterated, thanks given. Sarah presented each departing guest with a small favour, a sachet of lavender from her garden, tied with a pale ribbon, more air kisses, promises to meet again soon, and then they were gone, their cars purring softly down Willow Lane, leaving behind only the faint traces of perfume and the quiet aftermath. Sarah stood alone in the suddenly still garden. The table was a landscape of crumbs and empty cups, the chairs slightly askew. The performance was over. The audience had departed, satisfied. She took a deep breath, inhaling the mingled scents of cut grass, coffee, and fading flowers. The tension she had not allowed herself to feel began to seep from her shoulders. It had been a success. No missteps, no probing questions left unanswered, no cracks in the perfect pastel veneer. She began the methodical work of clearing, her movements slower now, solitary. As she gathered the delicate china, she thought not of the conversations about Eisenhower or crabgrass, but of the silent recognitions exchanged between herself and the other wives who understood the game. They were all tending their own gardens, she realized, both the literal and the metaphorical. They weeded out intrusions, pruned back curiosity, and cultivated an appearance of serene, sun-dappled normalcy, no matter what might be growing in the shadows just beyond the fence. It was a shared, unspoken labour. She carried the laden tray back into the spotless kitchen, leaving the beautiful temporary stage of the garden to the bees and the lengthening afternoon shadows. Inside, the pearls gleamed against her skin in the dimmer light, no longer just an accessory, but a part of the uniform, a badge of honour in this quiet pastel war for a respectable peace. The summons came not by telephone, but in person, as such summonses always did. Maria appeared on the front step of the Willow Lane house just after 9 on Thursday morning, unannounced. Sarah, wiping down the already clean countertops, saw the familiar, sturdy silhouette through the lace curtain and felt a subtle shift in the day's axis. This was not a social call. Maria wore her visiting dress, a severe navy number with a high neck and a hat pinned firmly over her steel grey curls. Her black handbag was clutched like a scepter. She did not smile as Sarah opened the door. "We go to Brooklyn. My cousin Antonia is sick. The one with the bad lungs. You drive me." It was not a request. It was a statement of familial logistics, an errand that existed outside the tidy orbit of garden parties and alta society meetings. It was a thread pulled from the deep old tapestry of the past, and Sarah's role was to follow it without question. "Of course, Maria. Let me get my things." 15 minutes later, the Chevrolet Bel Air was pointed west, away from the wide tree-lined avenues of Long Island toward the dense brick and asphalt heart of Brooklyn. Maria sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed ahead, offering only terse directions. "Take the Parkway." Not that exit, the next one. The further they drove, the more the landscape changed. The spacious lawns and detached colonials shrank, compressed. The sky, so vast over Willow Lane, was sliced into narrow ribbons by laundry lines and water towers. The streets grew closer, the buildings pressed shoulder to shoulder, their red brick stained with decades of soot and weather. Life here was not whispered behind picture windows. It was shouted from open fire escapes, argued on front stoops, celebrated in the aromas of competing gravies that seeped from every doorway. Maria's old neighborhood was a universe away from the suburb. Sarah navigated the narrow canyon-like streets, the car feeling suddenly too large, too shiny, an interloper. Children playing stickball in the road paused to stare. Men in sleeveless undershirts, leaning in doorways, watched the Bel Air pass with opaque eyes. The air itself was different, thicker, warmer, carrying the scent of baking bread, diesel fumes, and the faint sweet rot smell of the distant river. It was a place of deeper roots and harder surfaces, where loyalty was not a quiet understanding, but a necessary visible armor. They stopped before a 5-story walk-up, its sandstone facade crumbling at the edges. Fire escapes laddered the front like iron ivy. Maria did not wait for assistance, heaving herself out of the car with a grunt. "Park there. It's fine." She gestured to a spot directly in front of a fire hydrant. Sarah obeyed, the suburban instinct to follow rules momentarily overridden by an older, more potent code. The climb to the 4th-floor apartment was a journey through a symphony of other lives. Through thin doors came the wail of an operatic tenor on the radio, the sizzle of something in a pan, a baby's insistent cry, the smells of garlic, cabbage, and bleach, layered one upon the other. Maria moved slowly but steadily, her hand on the worn wooden banister, not pausing for breath. At a scarred door, she knocked, a specific pattern, 2 sharp, 1 soft. The door was opened by a wisp of a woman, Antonia, swaddled in a shawl despite the close heat of the building. Her face was pale, her eyes bright with fever and recognition. "Maria, you came, and you brought Serafina. Her voice was a papery rustle. The apartment behind her was a single room, dominated by a large bed, a crucifix on the wall, and an immense dark wood radio. It was immaculately clean, but impoverished in a way Sarah's home was not. The poverty was of space and light, not care. Marie embraced her cousin, speaking in rapid, musical Italian that Sarah only half understood. She was ushered in. The visit was brief, formal. Maria presented a paper bag containing oranges, a jar of homemade broth, and a small wrapped parcel of cheese. Antonia accepted them with tearful gratitude. Two older men, Antonia's brothers, materialized from a back room. They wore collarless shirts and suspenders, their faces maps of hard work and quiet endurance. When they were introduced to Sarah, they did not call her by her first name. They nodded respectfully, almost bowing their heads. Mrs. and Christian Lombardi, the taller one said, his voice gravelly. A pleasure. Your husband, he is well. You tell him Gino asks for him. Yes, Mrs. Lombardi, the other echoed. You tell Vinny we remember him, always. The deference was palpable, a tangible thing in the cramped, stuffy room. It was not the polite respect of the altar society ladies, but something older, more feudal. She was not Sarah here. She was Mrs. Lombardi, Vinny's wife, a representative of a certain power structure, a bearer of his status. She accepted their greetings with a quiet, gracious nod, mirroring their formality. As Maria concluded the visit with promises of prayers and more broth, the taller brother, Gino, stepped closer to Sarah. His movements were deliberate. He did not look her directly in the eye, but at a point just past her shoulder. From the inside pocket of his worn jacket, he withdrew a plain business-sized envelope, sealed. It was not thick, but it had substance. For Vinny, he said, his voice dropping, when you see him. A small thing. From the old friends. He held it out. Sarah did not hesitate. She did not look at the envelope, did not weigh it in her hand. She simply opened her structured leather handbag, the same one that carried the household envelope, and slipped it inside next to her compact and her key case. The action was smooth, practiced in its very lack of ceremony. She closed the clasp with a soft click. From the corner of her eye, she saw Maria watching. The older woman gave a single slow nod, her expression unreadable but her approval clear. The transaction, the true purpose of the errand beneath the visit to the sick cousin, was complete. It had taken less than 10 seconds. No money was visibly exchanged, no words of business spoken. It was an act of familial and unspoken obligation, handled with the quiet efficiency of a sacrament. Minutes later they were back in the car, the envelope a silent passenger in Sarah's bag. Maria settled into her seat with a sigh, the neighbourhood already receding behind them. Antonia looks bad, she said, as if commenting on the weather. The doctor says maybe pneumonia. We will send a girl to clean next week. The conversation turned, on the drive home, to the mundane, the rising price of veal, the impertinence of the new priest at Maria's parish, the need to remind Tommy to speak more Italian. Sarah drove, the familiar streets of Long Island gradually reappearing, wide and welcoming. The tightness in her chest, born of the close, loud streets and the weight of the envelope, began to ease. yet the contrast was now etched in her mind. Her life on Willow Lane was a beautiful, spacious room, but today's errand was a reminder that the room was connected by hidden hallways to other, older, more crowded chambers, where different rules applied and debts were paid in envelopes, passed in silence. She had navigated it perfectly, playing her part as the respectful conduit. Maria's nod was the only grade that mattered. As she turned onto their street, the sun gleaming on the manicured lawns, the envelope in her bag felt neither threatening nor mysterious. It was simply another item on the day's list, an errand run, an obligation fulfilled. She pulled into the driveway, the car purring to a stop in its accustomed spot, the ordered world of Willow Lane closing around her once more. The brief journey into the past already sealed away like the unopened envelope in her handbag. Der Regen begann kurz nach dem Mittagessen. Ein sanftes, beharrliches Trommeln auf dem Dach der Garage und den frisch gewaschenen Fensterscheiben. Verwandelte die Willow Lane in eine glänzende, graue Spiegelung ihrer selbst, ließ die Farben der Häuser verblassen und den Himmel zu einem einzigen tuchgrauen Tuch verschmelzen. Für Sarah war dieses Wetter kein Unglück, sondern eine Gelegenheit. Es schüffte nach innen gewandte Stille. Eine Pause im äußeren Rhythmus von Besorgungen und Besuchen, die perfekt für eine bestimmte, intime Pflicht war. Sie zog den kleinen Schlüsselbund mit den unscheinbaren Schlüsseln aus der Schublade ihres Sekretärs im Wohnzimmer. Eine von ihnen passte in das schmale Schloss der untersten Schublade, in der ihr Haushaltsbuch aufbewahrt wurde. Es war kein gewöhnliches Notizbuch, sondern ein schweres, in Leder gebundenes Hauptbuch mit Seiten, die von feinen blauen Linien in gleichmäßige Spalten unterteilt waren. Sie trug es zur Küche, ihrem Operationszentrum, und legte es auf den sauberen Tisch. Dann holte sie den weißen Umschlag mit den Haushaltsgeldern, der nur nach der wöchentlichen Füllung am Montag with a Prowl war, und einen Stapel Kettingen, die sie in einer kleinen Zinnschachtel sammelte. Eine Tasse entkoffenerten Kaffee stellte sie neben sich. Dies war ihre Buchführung, und sie war eine Angelegenheit von fast religiöser Ernsthaftigkeit. Mit ihrer schönsten, geschwungenen Schreibschrift begann sie, das Datum oben auf einer neuen Seite einzutragen. Mittwoch 18, Mittwoch 18, Mittwoch. Dann beitete sie sich systematisch durch die Quittung. Marino's Market, 1467, Jemu's Fleisch, Olivenöl, Thompson's Drugs, 2.98, Zahnpasta, Aspirin, Stromrechnung, 1845, Benzin, 4.5, Benzin, 4.50, Jede Betrag wurde in die entsprechenden Spalte eingetragen, Lebensmittel, Haushalt, Nebenkosten, Sonstiges. Ihre Bedingungen waren langsam, bedacht, jeder Cent wurde mit Respekt behandelt. Das Führen dieses Buches war mehr als nur eine finanzielle Aufgabe. Es war ein Akt der Bestätigung. Hier, in diesen soberen, geraden Linien und Präzisionsummen, war ihr Leben messbar, verständlich und unter Kontrolle. Die Zahlen addierten sich, oder sie taten es nicht. Es gab keine Grauzonen, keine Andeutungen, nur schwarze Tinte auf weißem Papier. Sie addierte die Ausgaben der Woche, eine Summe von $66.23. Dann zählte sie das Bargeld im Umschlag. Sie tat es zweimal. Ihre Finger bewegten die Scheine mit der gleichen Sorgfalt, mit der sie Tommys Händen bügelte. Eine leichte Falte bildete sich zwischen ihren Augenbrauen. Sie teilte ein drittes Mal. Das Ergebnis war dasselbe. Im Umschlag befanden sich nicht die erwarteten 67 persons, $272, die vom ursprünglichen Haushaltsgeld übrig bleiben sollten. Es waren 467 times D3, ein Überschuss von $200. Das sanfte Prasseln des Regens auf dem Fensterbrett schien lauter zu werden. Sie wusste sofort, woher das Geld kam. Es war aus dem Umschlag, den Gino ihr in der stickigen Wohnung in Brooklyn gegeben hatte. Der Umschlag für Winnie. Sie hatte ihn am Donnerstagabend nach der Rückkehr von dem Besuch bei Antonia wortlos auf den Sekretär in seinem Arbeitszimmer gelegt. Am Montagmorgen war der Haushaltsumschlag, wie immer, prall gefüllt, auf dem Küchentisch gelegen. Offensichtlich hatte Winnie einen Teil des Inhalts von Ginos Umschlag dazugegeben. Es war kein Gehalt, keine Reguläreinnahme. Es war etwas anderes, ein Geschenk, eine Rückzahlung, eine Provision für eine Dienstleistung, die nie benannt werden würde. Und nun lag es hier in ihrem Umschlag und störte die makellose Mathematik ihrer Welt. Sie blickte von dem Geld zu den sauberen Spalten ihres Hauptbuches. Die Diskrepanz war wie ein winziger Riss in einer perfekt glasierten Oberfläche. Sie konnte das Geld nicht einfach ignorieren. Das würde das Gleichgewicht zerstören, und das Gleichgewicht zu halten war eine Frage des Stolzes, ein Beweis ihrer Kompetenz. Aber sie konnte es auch nicht auflisten, wie den Einkauf beim Metzger oder die Stromrechnung. Welche Kategorie wäre angemessen? Einem Mann, unbenannt. Ausgaben, erlassen. Ihre Hand griff nach ihrem Füllfederhalter. Sie tauchte die Spitze in das Tintenfass, ließ einen überschüssigen Tropfen auf den Rand des Löschblatts fallen, dann mit derselben entschlossenen Precision, mit der sie ein Bild gerade gerückt hätte, fügte sie eine neue Zeile in die Spalte. Sonstiges ein, sie schrieb das heutige Datum. In die Beschreibungsspalte trug sie ein Max Gift. In die Einmädespalte schrieb sie 290 Mannspalte. Schrieb 202 zu Geschenk. Es war vage, aber nicht unehrlich. Es war eine Kategorie, die alles und nichts bedeuten konnte. Ein Geburtstagsgeschenk eines wohlmeinenden Verwandten. Ein unerwarteter Gewinn aus einer kirchlichen Tombola. Es war eine Brücke zwischen der präzisen, sauberen Welt ihres Hauptbuches und der undurchsichtigen, bargeldbasierten Welt, die gelegentliches Hauptbuches und der undurchsichtigen, bargeldbasierten Welt. Das Geld war jetzt erfasst, dem ordnenden Zugriff der Buchführung unterworfen. Der Riss war gekittet, die Oberfläche wieder glatt. Sie lehnte sich in ihrem Stuhl zurück und trank einen Schluck lauwarmen Kaffee. Ihr Blick wanderte vom Hauptbuch zum Küchenfenster, wo die Regentropfen unermüdlich die Scheibe hinunterliefen. Eine ruhige Reflexion überkam sie, nicht beunruhigend, sondern sachlich. Ihr Leben besaß eine Dualität, so klar wie die beiden Seiten einer Münze. Auf der einen Seite war dies, die beruhigende Gewissheit von Zahlen, die aufgehen, Der Stolz-Überblick über ein gut geführtes Heim. Die sichtbaren, greifbaren Früchte ihrer Arbeit. Das polierte Linoleum. Das gesteckte Leinen. Der perfekt ausgeglichene Haushalt. Auf der anderen Seite existierte ein paralleles Universum aus flüsternden Telefongesprächen, unmarkierten Umschlägen, gelegentlichen Geschenken von Juwelieren und den respektvollen Blicken älterer Männer in engen Wohnungen. Dieses Universum war opaque, flüssig, definiert durch das, was nicht gesagt wurde. Und doch flossen seine Ströme manchmal in ihren sauberen Kanal ein, wie dieser $200-Schein, der nun in ihrer Spalte Sonstiges verbucht war. Sie schloss die Augen. Der Gedanke war nicht neu, aber er wurde selten so klar benannt, selbst in der Stille ihres eigenen Geistes. Sie lebte in zwei Welten, die durch die dünnste Membran getrennt waren. Eine Welt aus Linien, die andere aus Andeutungen. Eine Welt aus Quittungen, die andere aus stillschweigenden Vereinbarungen. Die Membran war durchlässig, Werte in Form von Bargeld, von Perlen, von Sisilem, Ansehen, sickerten hindurch. Ihre Aufgabe, wie sie verstand, war es nicht, die Membran zu untersuchen oder zu hinterfragen. Ihre Aufgabe war es, dafür zu sorgen, dass die Seite, für die sie verantwortlich war, makellos blieb. Die Zahlen mussten stimmen, das Haus musste ruhig sein, die Oberfläche musste glatt und ungetrübt bleiben. Sie öffnete die Augen, schloss das Hauptbuch und schob den Umschlag mit dem Geld zur Seite. Die Reflexion war vorbei. Sie wählte sich auf das Greifbare zu konzentrieren. Sie stand auf, ging zum Spülbecken und spülte ihre Kaffeetasse aus. Sie trocknete sie ab und stellte sie zurück in den Schrank. Dann kehrte sie zum Tisch zurück, schloss das Hauptbuch mit einem Lesen, satten Klappern und trug es zurück zum Sekretär. Sie schloss die Schublade ab und steckte den kleinen Schlüssel in die Schürzentasche. Die Handlung war abschließend. Der Regine ließ allmählich nach, wurde zu einem leisen Triefen aus der Regenrinne. Ein matter, perlmutterner Schimmer brach durch die Wolkendecke. Sarah zündete eine Herdplatte an, am Wasser für Tee zu kochen. Während sie wartete, ging sie zum Fenster und betrachtete ihren Garten. Die Blätter glänzten nass und frisch. Alles sah gereinigt aus. Die $200 waren jetzt nur noch eine Zahl in einer Spalte, ein Eintrag in der Chronik ihres geordneten Lebens. Die Undurchsichtigkeit, aus der sie kamen, war irrelevant. Was zählte, war das Ergebnis. Das gut geführte Heim, das ausgeglichene Buch, die ruhige Gewissheit. Dass sie, egal was die andere Welt produzierte, hier in diesem Haus alles in makellose verständliche Form bringen würde. Der Teekessel, Piff sein scharfes, Glasleid, DDT, DP, der Teekessel, Piff sein scharfes, Glasleid, sie drehte sich in. Die Ordnung war wiederhergestellt, nicht durch Verleugnung, sondern durch präzise Einordnung. Das Leben auf der Willow Lane ging weiter, sauber, trocken und genau nach Plan. The first snow began in the deepest hour of the night, a secret transformation witnessed only by the street lamps and the insomniac eyes of the house cats. Sarah awoke to a different quality of silence, a muffled cotton wool. Hush that had settled over Willow Lane. She rose and parted the bedroom curtains. The world outside was remade. A thick, pristine blanket of white covered every lawn, roof, and automobile, rounding sharp edges, filling in the neat geometric divisions between properties. The familiar landscape was softened, unified under a luminous pale grey sky, from which a few last fat flakes still spiraled down. It was a scene of profound, impersonal peace. Downstairs, she brewed the coffee, the percolator's gurgle a domestic counterpoint to the immense quiet outside. The kitchen felt warmer, cozier, the windows offering a bright blank canvas. Tommy, when he clattered down for breakfast, let out a whoop that seemed to violate the sanctity of the morning. "Snow, Ma, can I go out? Can I build a fort?" His excitement was a vibrant human spark against the monochrome stillness. She bundled him into layers, wool socks, galoshes, a scarf wrapped so tightly only his eyes gleamed. She sent him out the back door with a warning to stay in the yard, and then she stood at the window over the sink, watching. He was a small, dark blot of joyous chaos against the perfect white. He kicked up powdery flurries, fell onto his back to make an angel with wildly swinging arms, scooped up handfuls to taste. His movements were pure, unself-conscious life. As she watched, the back door of the Henderson house opened, and Carol's two boys erupted, and soon the three of them were engaged in the serious business of fort construction, their shouts muffled and sweetened by the snow. It was a picture of normal childhood, of suburban winter, utterly unremarkable and therefore utterly precious. Then Vinny appeared. He came out the side door in his work trousers, an old sweater, and a heavy coat, carrying the aluminum snow shovel. He did not look toward the boys at play. He set to work on the front walk with a methodical, powerful rhythm. The shovel scraped and thudded, carving a clean, dark path through the white from the front steps to the sidewalk, then widening it to the driveway. He worked with the focused efficiency of any father on any street in America, clearing the way for his family, performing a duty as old as homeownership itself. His breath plumed in the cold air. From the kitchen window, Sarah watched him. In this moment he was indistinguishable from Harold Henderson or Fred Carmichael. He was a man shoveling his walk. The normalcy of it was so complete, it felt like an answer to a question she had never dared to ask aloud. The day passed in a slow, contented drift. Tommy came in, pink-cheeked and dripping, was fed hot soup and grilled cheese, and then, exhausted, fell asleep on the living room rug before the fireplace. Sarah lit the fire in the hearth, something she did only on the coldest or most special of days. The logs, applewood saved from a pruning last fall, caught quickly, their flames casting a dancing amber light across the room. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the deeper, older smells of the house. Furniture polish, wool carpet, contentment. As dusk fell, a deep blue quiet enveloped the house. The snow had stopped. The world was held in a crystalline suspension. Tommy was in bed, worn out from the day's adventures. The dinner dishes were washed and put away. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals. that pulsed with a gentle, heart-like rhythm. In the living room, Sarah sat in her armchair, a basket of mending at her feet. She was darning one of Vinny's wool socks, her needle moving in and out of the worn heel with a tiny, precise rhythm. The firelight gleamed on her wedding band and on the pearls she still wore, as if the day's performance had not yet fully ended. The task was mindless, soothing, an act of preservation. Across from her, Vinny sat in his chair. He had the evening paper open, but he wasn't really reading it. His eyes were fixed on the financial page, but they were still unfocused. The cigar he had lit earlier sat cold in the ashtray, forgotten. He was simply present, a solid, quiet mass in the room, his breathing slow and even. The only sounds were the faint crackle of the embers, the soft pull of thread through wool, and the occasional rustle of newsprint. The unspoken tensions of their life were still there. They hung in the air like the faint, cold draft from the window panes, part of the architecture of the room. The pearls at her throat, the surplus in the ledger, the name on the radio, the envelopes from Brooklyn, they were all present, woven into the fabric of this quiet evening, just as surely as the snow covered the traces of the day's footsteps outside. They were not gone, merely subsumed. They were part of the landscape now, familiar features like the old maple tree in the yard or the crack in the corner of the ceiling. They did not need to be acknowledged to be known. Her life, with its intricate routines, its moments of startling beauty, its profound and daily compromises, was simply what it was. It was this, the feel of warm wool under her fingers, the sight of her husband's profile etched against the firelight, the profound safety of her sleeping child upstairs, the immaculate white shroud over the world outside that hid the mud and the dormant grass and the neat dividing fences. It was a life of surfaces so meticulously maintained they had become a kind of truth, a piece so carefully constructed it felt, in moments like this, entirely real. She finished the sock, knotted the thread, and bit it off. She folded the mended pair neatly and placed it back in the basket. Vinny stirred, finally folding his paper with a sigh. He looked across at her, his eyes reflecting the dying fire. He didn't smile, but his gaze was soft, unguarded. He gave a single, slow nod, a communication that needed no words. It spoke of a shared journey, of a mutual understanding of the world they had built, and the costs of its maintenance. Sarah returned the nod, just as slight. Then she leaned her head back against the chair and looked into the fire. The coals shifted, sending up a tiny fountain of sparks that winked out before they reached the chimney. Outside, on Willow Lane, not a single car passed. The entire street was locked in snow and silence. In her warm, quiet living room, with the day's work done and her family safe around her, Serafina Lombardi allowed herself to feel not happiness perhaps, but a deep, ambiguous, and utterly complete peace. It was enough. It was, she thought as her eyes grew heavy, simply what it was. And for now, in the heart of winter's first, perfect silence, that was everything.